Chloe stood silently by the hospital window, gazing out at the city with a mixture of longing and resignation. The muted beeping of the machines and the sterile, antiseptic scent of the room were constant reminders of her mother's frailty, of the sacrifices Chloe had made to be here. She had once been a bright student, always at the top of her class, with dreams of attending university and working in business someday. Her mother had always encouraged her, calling Chloe her little light, the hope of a better future. But life had a way of changing plans without asking. A year ago, her mother had fallen ill, diagnosed with a rare and severe illness. Treatment required substantial costs, more than Chloe could have imagined. Slowly, they had sold everything they owned, their tiny home, cherished possessions, even Chloe's school books. And then, one by one, her dreams had to be sacrificed as well. She had dropped out of school and taken on every odd job she could find, barely earning enough to keep up with the endless bills. Despite everything, Chloe had managed to keep going. Her mother's life depended on her, and she refused to let her down. Chloe's days had become an exhausting cycle of work, worry, and weary trips to the hospital. She cleaned houses, served tables at late-night diners, and handled paperwork for a small business on weekends. Every paycheck was barely enough to keep her mother's treatments going. At times, she felt like she was running on empty. Yet she carried on, pushing forward with sheer will, even if it meant setting her own dreams aside indefinitely. In these rare quiet moments by the window, when her mother was resting and the world outside felt distant, Chloe would allow herself to drift into daydreams. She remembered the future she had once believed in, where she was strong, capable, and successful. Her only possession of that past life now was a handful of books on business and finance, tucked away in her tiny apartment. She would read them late at night, keeping alive a flicker of hope for herself. A life where she could still become someone her mother could be proud of. Looking at her mother's frail form in the hospital bed, Chloe's heart tightened. Her mother, though unconscious, seemed to rest more peacefully with Chloe by her side. The bills were rising, the odds felt insurmountable, but Chloe refused to give up. She couldn't afford to let herself waver. As Chloe hurried to her third job of the day, her eyes caught something small and gleaming on the ground. A ring, delicate and beautiful, with a single, dazzling diamond. She picked it up, marveling at the fine craftsmanship, her fingers tracing the smooth edges of the band. It was a glimpse into a world she'd never known, one where something so precious could be lost without notice. Chloe looked around, scanning the nearby crowd, when she noticed a man a few steps ahead patting his suit pockets, looking concerned. "Excuse me," she called out, hurrying forward as she held the ring aloft. "Is this yours?" The man turned, and for a moment, Chloe was taken aback. He was tall, dressed in a sharply tailored suit that complemented his chiseled features. He had an air of confidence about him, softened only by a look of relief that crossed his face when he saw the ring in her hand. His expression, initially focused and intense, softened into a slight smile. "Yes, thank you," he replied, reaching for the ring with a nod of gratitude. "I'd have been in serious trouble if I'd lost it." Chloe handed it over, feeling self-conscious in her simple attire compared to his polished presence. "I'm glad I could help," she said, her gaze lowering, aware of the contrast between them. He took the ring, slipping it back onto his finger, and then extended a hand toward her. "I'm Dylan," he introduced himself, his voice steady yet kind. His handshake was firm, and there was a warmth in his touch that surprised her. "Chloe," she replied softly, smiling shyly. He seemed to study her for a moment longer, as if seeing something that intrigued him. "Thank you, Chloe. I imagine most people wouldn't have been as honest." Chloe shrugged modestly. "I'm not most people, I suppose." Dylan's eyes lingered on her, and then with an unexpected sincerity, he asked, "Would you let me buy you a coffee to say thanks?" Chloe hesitated, the list of her responsibilities tugging at her thoughts. But something about Dylan's offer felt genuine, a rare act of kindness in her hectic life. She found herself nodding, curious to know more about this stranger whose world seemed so far from hers, yet who looked at her as if she were his equal. After their unexpected meeting, Dylan surprised Chloe by offering her a job. She had been hesitant at first, concerned about balancing yet another role in her already busy life. But Dylan assured her it would be steady work, the pay reasonable, and the hours flexible. She couldn't pass up the opportunity. It would mean she could ease up on some of her other, less stable jobs and even spend a little more time with her mother. Chloe's first days were spent organizing files and answering phones in Dylan's office. The atmosphere was different from anywhere she had worked before. The office was sleek and modern, with large glass windows overlooking the bustling city below. Staff dressed impeccably, moved briskly through the corridors, and seemed endlessly focused on their tasks. At first, Chloe felt out of place, like an outsider peering into a world that was not her own. But she approached each task with a quiet determination, knowing this opportunity was rare and that every day was a chance to prove herself. Soon, Dylan began to notice her attention to detail. She went beyond just sorting files. She would make suggestions, flagging important notes, or highlighting discrepancies that others might have overlooked. She wasn't simply doing what was asked of her. She was thinking ahead. One evening, as she stayed late organizing some client files, Dylan walked by, surprised to see her still at her desk. He watched her in silence for a moment before finally speaking. "You don't have to stay so late, Chloe," he said gently, his usual formal tone softening. "You've already done more than enough." She looked up, a little startled, and then gave a quick smile. "It's okay. I wanted to make sure everything was ready for tomorrow. I know you have that big meeting, and I just thought—" "Thank you," he interrupted, his voice sincere. "Your attention to detail is impressive. You're putting in more effort than anyone would expect." Chloe felt a flush of pride. She had spent so long working under difficult conditions, where her hard work often went unnoticed, that his simple acknowledgement of her dedication felt unexpectedly rewarding. She muttered a quick "thank you" and continued her work, feeling a warmth settle within her. Gradually, Dylan began to trust her with more responsibilities. He would leave her with summaries to write, files to analyze, and notes to organize. Chloe approached each task with the same diligence, always pushing herself to learn more. At night, she'd stay up late reading books about finance, management, and anything she could get her hands on that would help her understand his world better. One afternoon, Dylan called her into his office, handing her a thick report. "I need your help going over these numbers," he said. Chloe felt a jolt of excitement and anxiety. This was the first time he had entrusted her with something so significant. She carefully reviewed the data, working methodically, double-checking her calculations. When she presented her findings to Dylan, he listened attentively, his expression a mix of curiosity and respect. "You've got a good eye for detail," he said afterward, nodding appreciatively. "I don't think I would have caught this on my own." Chloe felt her confidence growing. For the first time, someone in a position of authority recognized her intelligence, her capacity for critical thinking, and her potential. She began to feel like she wasn't just working for Dylan, she was contributing to his business, maybe even making a difference. As weeks went by, the invisible walls that separated their worlds seemed to blur. Dylan would ask her opinion on small matters, seek her insight into client feedback, and even engage her in discussions about broader company plans. Chloe found herself drawn not only to his guidance, but also to his thoughtful, often quiet manner, sensing that behind his composed exterior was someone who valued hard work and honesty as much as she did. In return, Dylan noticed her unwavering dedication and resilience. The more he observed her, the more he saw her not just as a valuable worker, but as someone uniquely capable. Chloe's role at the company continued to evolve, shifting gradually from simple administrative tasks to more complex responsibilities. Dylan had initially been cautious, giving her only minor assignments, but as the weeks went by, her persistence and attention to detail became clear. She had a talent for spotting inconsistencies, a quick grasp of financial data, and a knack for identifying opportunities hidden within reports. The more she contributed, the more Dylan trusted her judgment. One morning, Dylan walked into the office with a look of contemplation. After a moment, he motioned for Chloe to join him in the conference room, an invitation she rarely received. Chloe's heart quickened as she followed him into the sleek, glass-walled room. She sat down, feeling both excitement and a bit of nervousness as she watched him open a laptop and pull up a series of charts and financial statements. "I could use a fresh perspective on these," Dylan began, turning the laptop screen toward her. "It's a client portfolio we're considering expanding, but something feels off. I can't quite pinpoint it." Chloe leaned forward, studying the screen with focus. She took her time examining each number, each trend, and each assumption. As she pieced the information together, she noticed patterns emerging, subtle indications of overextended investments and underperforming assets. Tentatively, she pointed them out, suggesting areas of caution. Dylan nodded thoughtfully, and for the first time, she sensed a deeper respect in his gaze. "That's exactly what I was trying to get at," he admitted. "You're thorough, Chloe. You see things others often miss." From that day on, Dylan began involving her in discussions that went beyond clerical work. He'd send her reports to analyze, ask her thoughts on potential investments, and occasionally even invite her to sit in on meetings with lower-level clients. Chloe took every opportunity to learn, diving into the work with enthusiasm and a meticulous eye. She spent late nights at the office, surrounded by stacks of documents, her mind constantly buzzing with numbers and possibilities. She was learning not only the language of business, but also the mindset that came with it, the art of seeing potential in what others overlooked. One evening, after an intense discussion about a challenging project, Dylan looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. "You know, Chloe, I used to handle all of this alone, but working with you, I feel like I have a partner." The word lingered in the air, unexpected yet gratifying. Chloe looked at him, slightly taken aback. "A partner?" she repeated, a small smile forming. Dylan returned her smile with one of his own, a rare softness in his usually reserved expression. "Yes, a partner," he said simply. "Your insights make a difference. You've helped me see things from angles I hadn't considered before. I don't know if anyone else could do that." The affirmation filled Chloe with a quiet pride she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer just an employee. She was becoming someone he relied on, someone he trusted to support him in his ambitions. She realized that she had found a place not only in his company, but also in his world, a world she'd once felt was beyond her reach. As the days passed, their interactions grew warmer and more familiar. They developed a rhythm, understanding each other's thoughts with little need for words. Chloe felt her admiration for Dylan deepen, not only for his knowledge, but also for his steady character and integrity. He was more than just her employer. He was someone she respected profoundly, and who it seemed respected her in return. In small, almost imperceptible ways, their partnership grew stronger. They became a team, united not just by their work, but by a shared vision. Chloe could feel something new and unspoken between them, a connection forged from trust, respect, and a feeling she dared not yet name. The grand ballroom shimmered with opulence, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and elegant guests adorned in their finest attire. Chandeliers cast a warm glow across the room, while soft music played in the background. Chloe stood at the entrance, her breath catching as she took in the splendor around her. She wore a graceful, midnight blue gown that Dylan had arranged for her, the fabric soft and flowing, highlighting her natural beauty in a way she hadn't expected. She felt like she had stepped into a world straight out of a fairy tale. She scanned the crowd, her eyes landing on Dylan. He looked striking in a perfectly tailored suit, his posture relaxed yet commanding. When he noticed her, he offered a small smile and walked over, his gaze warm as he took in her appearance. Chloe felt a flutter in her chest as he stopped in front of her, his gaze lingering a moment longer than usual. "You look perfect," he murmured, his voice low. The compliment, simple as it was, made her blush. "Thank you," she replied softly, barely managing to hold his gaze. The sense of awe she felt in his presence tonight was stronger than usual. He was still her boss, but there was something different in his demeanor, something almost tender. Dylan extended his arm. "Shall we?" She took his arm, allowing him to guide her into the crowd of guests. As they moved through the ballroom, Chloe felt the curious stares and whispers from those around them. She caught glimpses of people assessing her with surprise, perhaps even skepticism, but she pushed the unease aside, focusing instead on Dylan's steady presence beside her. Being here with him made her feel like she belonged, even in a world so far removed from her own. When the music shifted to a soft, slow waltz, Dylan turned to face her. For a moment, she hesitated, her heart racing, but he extended his hand to her, his expression gentle and reassuring. She placed her hand in his, and he led her to the dance floor. Their movements started out slightly awkward, but as Dylan guided her, she began to feel more at ease, following his lead. Chloe found herself lost in the rhythm, the rest of the room fading away until there was only him. His hand rested lightly on her waist, and their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Chloe saw something in his gaze that took her breath away, a warmth, an intensity, something she couldn't quite name, but that made her heart ache with its sincerity. "Thank you for being here with me tonight," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the music. "You've made this evening memorable." Chloe smiled, feeling a swell of emotion she hadn't expected. "I should be thanking you," she replied. I've never experienced anything like this." Dylan's expression softened, his thumb gently brushing her waist as they continued to dance. "You deserve this, Chloe, more than you know." In that moment, the world around them felt suspended, as if nothing else mattered but the two of them, moving in sync to the quiet, timeless melody. Chloe's heart pounded as she allowed herself to savor the closeness, to bask in the warmth radiating from him. She didn't need words to understand what was happening. His actions spoke louder than anything he could say. The way he held her, the way he looked at her, it was as though he saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one else ever had. From across the ballroom, Jessica, the elegant daughter of Dylan's business associate, watched the two of them with narrowed eyes. She took in Dylan's gaze, the way his attention was solely focused on Chloe, and felt a surge of jealousy she couldn't ignore. She turned away, clenching her glass tightly, her mind already racing with thoughts of how to intervene. But Chloe and Dylan were oblivious to everything around them. For the first time, she felt as if she could let herself believe in the impossible. Wrapped in his embrace, under the soft lights of the ballroom, Chloe dared to imagine that maybe, just maybe, she belonged in his world. Late one evening, after another grueling day at work, Chloe felt the fatigue weighing heavily on her. She'd pushed herself relentlessly, handling extra tasks to lighten Dylan's workload, staying late to ensure everything was organized for the following day. But her body, worn thin by long hours and little rest, was finally reaching its limit. A light fever prickled at her skin, and she could feel her energy slipping away. Dylan noticed the strain on her face when he passed by her desk that night. "Chloe, are you all right?" he asked, his brow furrowing as he studied her. His voice, usually composed, held a note of genuine concern. Chloe forced a weak smile, brushing it off. "I'm fine, really, just a bit tired." But even as she spoke, her voice sounded faint, lacking the usual brightness he was accustomed to hearing. Dylan didn't look convinced. He stepped closer and with a gentle insistence placed a hand on her forehead. The gesture was surprisingly tender, and Chloe was too worn out to protest. "You're burning up," he said, worry deepening his tone. "You're not fine. You're coming with me." Before she could respond, he was already gathering her things, placing her coat around her shoulders and guiding her out the door. Chloe, too exhausted to argue, let him lead her. The ride in his car was quiet, save for the sound of the rain that had begun to patter against the windows. Dylan glanced over at her now and then, his eyes softening each time he saw her head leaning wearily against the seat. They pulled up to her small apartment building, the rain now coming down in heavy sheets. Dylan stepped out, quickly rounding the car to her side and opening the door. He held an umbrella over her, shielding her from the downpour as he helped her up to the entrance. Chloe swayed slightly, feeling dizzy as she struggled to keep her balance. Dylan's arm came around her, steady and reassuring. "You don't have to do this," Chloe murmured, her voice faint with exhaustion but touched by gratitude. "You've done so much already." Dylan looked at her, a faint smile softening his expression. "You do the same for me. Now, come on." As they reached her door, Chloe fumbled for her keys, but her fingers felt numb and clumsy. Dylan gently took the keys from her, unlocking the door and guiding her inside. Her apartment was modest, neat and tidy, but sparsely decorated, a testament to her simple lifestyle. He led her to the small sofa and helped her sit, disappearing briefly to grab a glass of water and a damp cloth from the kitchen. He returned, kneeling beside her to press the cool cloth to her forehead. Chloe closed her eyes, a quiet sigh escaping her lips as the relief washed over her. She hadn't realized how badly she'd needed someone to care for her. The kindness in Dylan's touch, the gentleness of his actions, made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to keep her eyes open. I don't know why you're doing all of this." Dylan met her gaze, his eyes soft. "Because you've been pushing yourself too hard, Chloe. You're always taking care of others, and you never let anyone take care of you. Let me help, just this once." There was something raw, almost vulnerable in his voice that took her by surprise. She nodded slowly, too tired to argue, feeling a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. As she drifted off, Dylan stayed by her side, watching over her with a quiet protectiveness. Hours later, Chloe awoke to find a blanket carefully draped over her and a small note on the table. "Rest well, Chloe. Don't worry about tomorrow. I'll handle everything." A soft smile spread across her face as she read his words. Dylan's kindness felt like a gentle anchor, grounding her in a moment of warmth she hadn't known she'd been missing. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean into that feeling, treasuring the memory of his touch, his care, and the unspoken connection that seemed to grow deeper with every passing day. One rainy afternoon, Chloe was at work, her mind drifting in and out of focus as she worried about her mother. Her mother's health had been deteriorating for weeks, and Chloe had been doing her best to hide her worry. But that afternoon, her phone buzzed with the call she had been dreading. Her mother had been rushed to the hospital. Panic surged through her as she quickly gathered her things and prepared to leave. Dylan, noticing the urgency in her movements, stepped out of his office and approached her. "Chloe, what's wrong?" "My mom, she's in the hospital," Chloe said, her voice trembling as she struggled to stay composed. "I have to go." Without a moment's hesitation, Dylan nodded. "I'll drive you." The ride to the hospital was filled with tense silence. Chloe's eyes were fixed on the window, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Dylan glanced over at her occasionally, his own expression somber. When they arrived, he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder as they walked through the hospital corridors. Chloe rushed to her mother's side as soon as they reached the room. Her mother looked frail, her breathing shallow, and Chloe's heart clenched at the sight. She sat beside her, holding her mother's hand, whispering words of comfort. Time seemed to stand still as she focused entirely on her mother, barely noticing that Dylan had quietly remained in the background, giving her space while staying close in case she needed him. As the hours wore on, Chloe felt the weight of her worries growing heavier. She knew the treatments were costly, and her savings were dwindling with every hospital visit. She'd sacrificed everything she had to keep her mother's health stable, but the medical bills seemed to multiply endlessly. At some point, Dylan quietly stepped out of the room. Chloe was too lost in her thoughts to notice, her mind spinning with concerns about her mother and the rising costs. But when he returned, his face was calm, as if he'd already made a decision he didn't need to discuss. He came up to her gently and said, "I've spoken to the billing office. You don't need to worry about the expenses, Chloe. It's taken care of." Chloe's head shot up, her eyes wide with shock. "Dylan, I can't let you do that. It's too much." He simply shook his head, his expression gentle but firm. "You've worked tirelessly for everyone else, Chloe. Let me help you this time." Tears pricked her eyes and she swallowed hard, overwhelmed by his kindness. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice barely steady. "You don't need to," he replied softly. "Just focus on your mom. That's what matters right now." For the next several hours, Dylan stayed by her side, offering quiet support as Chloe sat vigil by her mother's bed. He stepped out to get food for her when she needed it, gently urging her to eat, and brought a blanket to drape over her shoulders as night fell and the chill in the room grew stronger. His presence was constant, unwavering, and each small act of care brought a comfort Chloe hadn't known she needed. When her mother eventually stirred awake, Chloe leaned forward, a relieved smile breaking through her worry. Her mother, her voice weak but filled with warmth, noticed Dylan standing nearby. "Who's this young man?" she asked softly, her gaze shifting between them. Chloe hesitated, glancing at Dylan, and then turned back to her mother. "This is Dylan, Mom. He's been helping me a lot." Her mother looked at Dylan with a gratitude that mirrored Chloe's own, and she gently squeezed Chloe's hand. "You found a good one, my dear." Dylan smiled at her mother, then at Chloe, his eyes filled with something deep, something unspoken. In that moment, Chloe realized just how much he had quietly done for her, how much he cared, and how much she had come to depend on him. As they left the hospital later that night, Chloe's heart felt lighter, not only because of her mother's recovery, but because she knew that despite everything, she wasn't alone. Dylan had been there for her in her darkest moment, offering more than just support. He'd offered her hope. And for that, she was endlessly grateful. Jessica had been observing Dylan and Chloe's growing closeness for some time. Each glance they shared, every quiet conversation that ended in soft laughter, deepened the knot of jealousy that had been building in her chest. She had known Dylan long before Chloe had entered the picture, and in her mind, he was supposed to be hers, a perfect match of status, wealth, and social grace. Yet here was Chloe, a woman with no background, no wealth, somehow capturing his attention in ways Jessica never could. Determined to put an end to it, Jessica arranged a meeting with Chloe, inviting her to an upscale cafe under the pretense of getting to know her better. Chloe, ever polite, accepted, though she felt nervous under Jessica's gaze, sensing the chill behind her practiced smile. Jessica wasted no time. "Chloe, I'll get right to the point," she said, leaning forward. "I care about Dylan. We've known each other for years. People like you and him, you don't belong in the same world." Chloe blinked, stunned. She could feel the words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She straightened, trying to maintain her composure. "I'm not sure what you mean, Jessica." Jessica's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure you know exactly what I mean. Dylan is part of a world that requires certain qualities, status, resources, connections. You have none of those things." Her voice dripped with disdain, each word carefully chosen to remind Chloe of the vast gulf between their lives. Chloe's throat tightened, but she held Jessica's gaze, refusing to let her see the hurt she felt. "Dylan doesn't seem to care about those things," she replied, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. Jessica let out a small, dismissive laugh. "That's where you're wrong. Men like Dylan might be charmed by someone like you, briefly. But when it comes down to it, they'll always choose someone who fits into their world, someone who won't drag them down." Jessica's words settled over Chloe like a dark cloud, doubts creeping in with every pointed remark. "Maybe you should think about what's best for him, Chloe," Jessica continued, her tone softening as if she were offering friendly advice. "If you really care about him, you wouldn't make him choose between love and his future." The thought pierced Chloe's heart. Jessica's words echoed fears Chloe had tried to suppress, fears about her own worth, about whether she truly belonged in Dylan's life. "Thank you for your concern, Jessica," Chloe managed, rising from her seat with as much composure as she could muster. "But only Dylan can decide what's best for him." Jessica watched her leave, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. She had planted the seed of doubt, and she was confident it would grow. That night, Chloe sat alone in her small apartment, Jessica's words echoing in her mind. Despite her attempts to ignore them, the doubts had seeped in like poison. Every kind gesture Dylan had shown her, every look of admiration, suddenly felt tainted by the reality Jessica had painted. Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she had been selfish, clinging to someone who deserved more than she could give. As she looked around her modest room, her heart ached. She realized that the world Dylan belonged to was as far from hers as two worlds could be. She had seen glimpses of it, the polished events, the effortless elegance, the silent judgment of people like Jessica. And though Dylan never seemed to mind, Chloe knew he faced expectations from those around him. She could see that if she stayed, she might one day be the reason he had to choose between her and his future. With a heavy heart, Chloe sat down at her small desk, pulling out a piece of paper. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling as she began to write. Her words came slowly, each sentence a painful goodbye. "Dylan, You have given me more kindness than I ever expected to find in this world. Every moment with you has been a gift that I will always cherish. But I have come to understand that my presence in your life may one day hold you back. I cannot bear to be the reason you are forced to choose between your heart and everything you've worked for. Please don't look for me. Know that this decision is made out of love and respect for all that you are and all that you will become. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything. As she finished, a single tear slipped down her cheek. She folded the letter, placing it carefully on the table where he would find it. It felt surreal, leaving behind the one person who had made her feel valued, the one person who saw her as more than just a girl with a troubled past. She packed a small bag with a few belongings, keeping her movements quiet, as if trying not to disturb the memories embedded in these walls. She took one last look around, her heart heavy, and then slipped out into the night, closing the door behind her with finality. The city streets were cold and silent, mirroring the emptiness she felt. She walked with her head down, unsure of where she was going, only knowing she couldn't stay. Her footsteps echoed in the quiet, and with every step, she felt the weight of her choice pressing down harder. The morning sun had barely risen when Dylan arrived at Chloe's apartment, his heart pounding with a sense of urgency. He had felt something was wrong the night before, a nagging feeling he couldn't ignore. But as he knocked on her door, there was no answer. He knocked again, then again, until finally, in desperation, he tried the handle. The door swung open, revealing the emptiness within. On the table, he saw it, a folded piece of paper with his name written in her familiar handwriting. With a heavy heart, he picked it up and began to read, each line tightening the grip of loss and disbelief around him. The letter fell from his hand as he stared at the empty room, his mind reeling. She had left, believing she was doing the right thing, believing she was sparing him from a future of difficult choices. But in doing so, she had taken with her the one thing he truly needed. He wouldn't let her walk away, not like this. Without a second thought, he was out the door, calling every contact he could think of, retracing the steps she might have taken. Hours passed with no sign of her, and just as desperation started to settle in, one call led him to a quiet bus station on the outskirts of the city. Dylan arrived breathless, scanning the station until he saw her. Chloe sat on a bench, a small bag at her side, her gaze lost in the distance. Relief washed over him, and he strode forward, determined to make her understand. "Chloe," he called, his voice breaking the stillness of the station. She turned, startled, her eyes widening with a mix of shock and sadness as she took in the sight of him. "Dylan, what are you doing here?" she whispered, barely able to meet his gaze. He stepped closer, his eyes intense, unwavering. "I came to find you. Chloe, why did you leave?" She looked away, her fingers twisting nervously. "I didn't want to be the reason you had to choose. You deserve someone who belongs in your world, not someone like me." Dylan shook his head, reaching out to gently take her hands. "Chloe, don't you see? I've already chosen. I chose you, every single day, whether you realized it or not." Her breath caught as she looked up at him, searching his face. "But everyone else, they think—" "I don't care what anyone else thinks," he interrupted, his voice fierce yet filled with tenderness. "None of them see what I see. They don't know the strength, the kindness, or the resilience you carry. Chloe, none of that means anything without you. You're not holding me back. You're the reason I want to move forward." Tears welled in her eyes, and she felt her resolve crumble. "Dylan, I was so scared that I wasn't enough for you." "You are more than enough," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. "Stay with me, Chloe. Don't ever doubt that you belong with me." Chloe clung to him, letting the warmth of his embrace melt away her fears. In his arms, she knew she had found her place, and finally, she let herself believe she deserved to stay. When Chloe returned to the company after reuniting with Dylan, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her fears had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence and determination to prove her worth, not just to Dylan or his world, but to herself. She had come to realize that she wasn't defined by her past or her circumstances. She was defined by what she was capable of achieving. And now, she had someone who believed in her every step of the way. The day she returned, Dylan welcomed her with a warm smile that set her heart at ease. But she knew she still had work to do. There were clients and colleagues who viewed her with skepticism, some whispering that she was only there because of Dylan's favor. It stung, but Chloe reminded herself that her actions, not their opinions, would speak for her. It wasn't long before she had her chance to prove herself. A high-profile client meeting was scheduled for that week, and Dylan had been planning to present a new strategy. But 2 days before the meeting, he approached Chloe with a suggestion that took her by surprise. "I want you to lead the presentation," he said, his tone both supportive and resolute. Chloe's eyes widened, her nerves immediately kicking in. "Me? But this is a major client. Are you sure?" Dylan met her gaze steadily. "I am. You know this strategy as well as I do, maybe even better. I've seen your dedication and your insight, Chloe. This is your opportunity to show them who you are." Chloe took a deep breath, nodding as she absorbed his words. She spent the next 2 days preparing every detail, determined to be ready for any question or challenge that might come her way. She stayed late into the night, reviewing figures, memorizing key points, and fine-tuning her approach until she felt confident that she could handle whatever was thrown at her. The day of the presentation arrived, and as Chloe walked into the boardroom, she could feel the weight of skeptical eyes on her. Jessica was there, seated alongside a few key executives and the clients. Jessica's cool gaze conveyed a silent challenge, daring Chloe to stumble. But instead of allowing herself to feel intimidated, Chloe took a steadying breath, reminded herself of all she had worked for, and began her presentation. As she spoke, Chloe's voice was clear and unwavering. She outlined the strategy with precision, using data and insights she'd spent hours perfecting. Her hands moved confidently as she pointed out graphs and projections, anticipating the client's needs and emphasizing how the company's approach could help them reach their goals. Midway through, one of the clients raised a challenging question about potential risks. Chloe met his gaze without flinching and provided a thorough, well-supported response, offering contingency plans she had prepared in advance. The client nodded, impressed by her depth of knowledge and foresight. Jessica's expression grew increasingly strained, a flicker of surprise flashing across her face as Chloe continued to handle every question with poise and expertise. Dylan watched her with quiet pride, his confidence in her shining through his encouraging gaze. By the end of the presentation, Chloe had not only won over the clients, but also the respect of those in the room who had doubted her. The clients offered their approval, extending a handshake that sealed the deal, and the room filled with murmurs of appreciation. When the meeting ended, Dylan approached her with a proud smile. "You were incredible," he said, his voice filled with warmth. Chloe returned his smile, a sense of accomplishment filling her. "Thank you for believing in me." As they walked out of the boardroom together, Chloe felt a renewed sense of confidence. She had proven to herself and everyone else that she deserved her place here. For the first time, she felt she was standing firmly in her own power, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Jessica watched from a distance, her expression guarded as she observed Dylan and Chloe's closeness, the subtle glances they exchanged, the ease in their laughter. She had always seen herself as the right match for Dylan, someone who understood his world, who could fit seamlessly into the life he'd built. Yet here was Chloe, with her humble background and quiet resilience, winning his heart in a way that Jessica never could. At first, she had been filled with resentment, convinced that Chloe was nothing more than a temporary distraction. Jessica had spent years cultivating an image, fitting perfectly into her family's expectations and social circles, learning the language of high society and business. She had assumed that someone like Dylan would always choose stability, status, and connection over anything else. But as time passed, Jessica couldn't ignore the reality before her. Dylan's happiness was evident in the way he looked at Chloe, in the way he lit up when she was around. Chloe wasn't just a passing interest. She was someone who brought out the best in him, someone who understood him in ways that went beyond status or wealth. Jessica began to see that what they shared was real, deeper than any social expectation or business connection. One afternoon, after witnessing Chloe's successful presentation, Jessica found herself unable to ignore the truth any longer. She saw how Chloe had not only earned the respect of the clients, but also of everyone else in the room. The quiet, unassuming woman she'd once dismissed had proven herself, not through pedigree or connections, but through hard work and genuine intelligence. Reflecting on it, Jessica realized how much she had allowed her own fears and insecurities to cloud her judgment. She had been so focused on maintaining an image, on fulfilling expectations, that she'd lost sight of what mattered most. In her ambition, she had treated love as if it were another business deal, a connection to be strategized rather than a relationship to be nurtured. But Dylan and Chloe had something different, something she couldn't force or fabricate, no matter how hard she tried. Finally, one day, Jessica approached Chloe in the hallway, her usual aloofness softened by something more genuine. Chloe looked up, a bit surprised, as Jessica took a breath and spoke, her tone uncharacteristically sincere. "I underestimated you, Chloe," Jessica admitted, her gaze steady but lacking its usual sharpness. I thought you'd never last here, that you wouldn't be able to understand this world, but I see now that I was wrong." Chloe met Jessica's gaze, slightly taken aback by the unexpected admission, but she nodded respectfully. "I didn't expect to stay either," she replied honestly. "But Dylan believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Jessica's expression softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to really understand what that meant. She had always seen love through the lens of expectation and compatibility. She hadn't thought about what it meant to truly care for someone, to want them to be happy, even if it meant letting go of her own plans. "I hope." Jessica paused, searching for the right words. "I hope you know how lucky you are. He's a good man." Chloe smiled, a gentle understanding in her eyes. "I do, and I think we both know that." Jessica nodded, feeling a surprising sense of closure. For the first time, she could let go of her jealousy, seeing clearly that Dylan's happiness wasn't something she could control or orchestrate. She had learned a hard lesson about love, that it wasn't about finding someone who fit an ideal, but about connecting with someone who truly saw you for who you were. With a quiet mutual understanding, Jessica walked away, feeling lighter than she had in years. She knew now that Dylan's heart belonged to someone else, and instead of bitterness, she felt a strange kind of peace. In her heart, she made a promise to herself to seek something deeper, something real, just as Chloe and Dylan had found with each other. Dylan and Chloe's partnership took on new life as they settled into their roles, no longer as employer and assistant, but as true partners. With Chloe's fresh perspective and Dylan's seasoned experience, they found a natural rhythm that elevated both their work and their vision for the company. What once had been a rigid hierarchy transformed into a balanced collaboration, where Chloe felt just as empowered to contribute ideas as Dylan did. Together, they made bold moves, revitalizing the company's approach and extending new opportunities to others who, like Chloe, came from humble beginnings. It was Dylan's idea to create an internship program aimed at those with limited resources, an opportunity he believed could uncover hidden potential, much as he'd found in Chloe. With her experience and insight, Chloe led the initiative, overseeing the selection process and working one-on-one with each intern. She was dedicated, personally involved, and passionate about giving others the same chance she had once desperately needed. One morning, as they reviewed applicants, Dylan glanced over at her, an affectionate smile playing on his lips. "You've turned this place around, you know?" he said, voice full of pride. "I don't think anyone else could have inspired change the way you have." Chloe looked back at him, a hint of humor in her eyes. "I think you're giving me too much credit," she replied, though his words warmed her deeply. "I couldn't have done it without you." Dylan shook his head. "No, Chloe, this was you. You reminded me why I wanted to build this company in the first place. It's easy to forget what matters when you get caught up in profits and deals, but you brought that heart back." Their success as partners was evident in more than just profits. It was in the way employees now viewed them with admiration and respect, in the way clients trusted their integrity, and in the energy that filled the office each day. Chloe's natural warmth and empathy had created a workplace where people felt valued and inspired, a stark contrast to the high-pressure, cold corporate environment it once had been. Chloe also thrived in the role, proving herself more than capable of handling challenges and coming up with innovative solutions. With Dylan's support, she ventured into departments she'd never thought she'd understand: finances, client relations, marketing strategies. She realized that her experiences, her struggles, and her compassion were not just assets. They were precisely what the company needed. Her journey was inspiring not only to herself, but to everyone in the office who watched her rise from modest beginnings to become a leader in her own right. One afternoon, Dylan brought her into a meeting with some of their top clients, the same kind of powerful, influential people who once intimidated her. Chloe stood before them with confidence, presenting their vision with clarity and conviction. She outlined the values that now guided the company: integrity, opportunity, and meaningful impact. Dylan watched her speak with admiration, his heart swelling with pride as he realized how far she had come. The clients were visibly impressed, their nods of approval making it clear that Chloe had won them over, not through flashy words or empty promises, but through sincerity and dedication. When the meeting ended, one of the clients approached her, shaking her hand firmly. "I can see why Dylan holds you in such high regard," he said, his eyes kind. "It's rare to see someone who truly cares about more than just the bottom line." Chloe smiled, glancing over at Dylan, who watched her with an approving nod. "Thank you. I believe a company should reflect the people it serves." As the clients left, Dylan walked over to her, a sense of satisfaction evident on his face. "You're remarkable, Chloe," he said. "I don't think I ever imagined finding someone who could transform this place the way you have." Chloe met his gaze, her eyes filled with warmth. "It's more than just a company now. It's a place that changes lives. And that's because of you too, Dylan." Their bond as partners grew even deeper, fueled not just by mutual respect, but by a shared dream. The company thrived, but so did their relationship, rooted in the values that had brought them together from the start. They continued to take on challenges, but always with a reminder of the purpose that guided them, a purpose they both shared and understood. Over time, Chloe realized that her fears of not belonging in Dylan's world had faded entirely. She wasn't just accepted, she was valued and recognized, a vital part of a vision she and Dylan had built together. Their connection, forged through trust, respect, and an unwavering belief in each other, was unbreakable. In their journey, Chloe and Dylan had transformed not only the company but each other, finding purpose and happiness that extended far beyond the confines of an office. They had become a true team, stronger together than either could have been alone. Years passed, and the company continued to flourish under the shared leadership of Dylan and Chloe. But as their lives expanded beyond the office, so did their dreams. They had built something lasting in the business world, but their deepest joy came from their life together beyond it. A life grounded in family, love, and the values that had always united them. Dylan and Chloe's home was warm and inviting, a beautiful house nestled on the edge of the city, with wide windows overlooking a peaceful garden. It was filled with laughter and love, decorated with memories of the life they'd built and the journey they had shared. They had 2 children, a curious, wide-eyed boy named Liam and a gentle, kind-hearted girl named Ella. The children were the heart of their lives, each day filled with new discoveries and small, precious moments that reminded Chloe and Dylan of what truly mattered. Every evening, the family gathered around the dinner table, where laughter mingled with stories of the day. Dylan and Chloe used these moments to share the lessons they had learned, teaching Liam and Ella about the importance of kindness, integrity, and resilience. They encouraged questions, valuing their children's perspectives, and helping them see the world through compassionate eyes. One night, as the family sat by the fireplace, Ella, with her mother's soulful eyes, looked up at Chloe with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," she asked, "how did you and Dad meet?" Chloe smiled, glancing at Dylan, who returned her smile with a look of understanding. She pulled Ella onto her lap, Liam settling beside his father, both children listening intently. "Well," Chloe began, her voice soft, It started with a small, simple act. I found something that belonged to your dad and gave it back to him. I didn't expect it, but that one little moment changed everything. Ella's eyes widened with curiosity. But how did you know he was the one? She asked. Chloe exchanged a glance with Dylan, memories flooding back of the quiet strength and steady kindness that had drawn her to him from the beginning. I think I knew because he saw me, Ella. Really saw me for who I was. He didn't care where I came from or what I had, and I loved him because he believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Dylan placed a gentle hand on Liam's shoulder. Your mom taught me what it means to care about people, not just success or appearances. She showed me the kind of strength that isn't loud or flashy, but true and lasting. I wouldn't be who I am today without her. The children listened, captivated, soaking in the story of their parents' journey. They sensed something magical in the way their mother's voice softened as she spoke about their father, and the way he looked at her as if he were still as deeply in love as the day they'd met. As the fire crackled in the background, Liam spoke up, his voice thoughtful. So, you both helped each other? Chloe smiled, brushing a stray hair from Liam's forehead. Yes, we did. We learned that life isn't about what you have or where you come from. It's about who you are and how you treat the people around you. Ella nodded, her eyes shining with admiration. I want to be like that too, Mom, like you and Dad. Dylan's heart swelled as he looked at his family, feeling a sense of pride and gratitude he could never fully express. You will be, he assured them. And no matter where life takes you, remember that kindness, integrity, and resilience are what matter most. Those are the things that build a good life. As the night deepened, Dylan wrapped his arm around Chloe, pulling her close as their children nestled beside them. They watched the flickering firelight, feeling the quiet contentment of a life well lived, one built not on wealth or prestige, but on the love they shared and the values they held dear. In those moments, Chloe realized they had come full circle. She had once been a girl filled with dreams, but limited by her circumstances. Now, she was a woman who had created a family filled with love, a life she could be proud of, and a legacy she could pass on. She looked at Dylan, knowing that together, they had built something timeless. Not just a successful company, but a home filled with the values they treasured. And as she held his hand, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey they had taken together. A journey that had led them to a happiness that was as deep and real as the love that had brought them together.